Hello, and welcome to another edition of Your Therapist Needs Therapy, the podcast where two mental health professionals talk about their mental health journeys and how they navigate mental wellness while working in the mental health field. I'm your host, Jeremy Schumacher, a licensed marriage and family therapist. And today I am joined by a returning guest, which is always excited. I'm joined by Michelle F. Moseley. Michelle, thanks for joining me today.
Thank you so much. I'm glad to be back.
I love having returning guests because we can sort of talk about a specific mental health topic instead of just sort of doing it's not investigative, but instead of doing the how'd you become a therapist, tell me about that, we can sort of converse on a deeper level around a specific topic. And so our paths had crossed in the religious trauma circles again after a while. You've been on the podcast and you said, hey, I don't know if I had been diagnosed last time we did a podcast. Do you want to talk about that? And I was like, yes, obviously. So let's talk about neurodivergence, and let's maybe start chronologically with when you got diagnosed and what that looked like.
Yeah. So I am 45 at this point in my life. This diagnosis journey has been kind of intense the past 2 to 3 years. It was probably about 10 years ago that I first started thinking, I feel like I may be on the autism spectrum. A lot of these things are lining up. And the more that I learned about how autism can present in women and folks assigned female at birth, the things that were overlooked, especially for folks kind of in my generation, and just learning more about that and realizing this is lining up more and more and more. For me, I actually have chosen not to go the route of being officially diagnosed. I obviously work in the mental health field. I've talked with lots of folks that can do the diagnosis. It has been confirmed, but not officially for a lot of reasons. And I also recognize that because I'm in private practice, I control my own schedule. And the way that my autism presents, I have the privilege of not having to have that official diagnosis.
Yeah. Yeah. I think sort of the way I talk about it with folks when I'm doing the diagnosis for them is it's helpful. It's helpful to know why your brain is doing what it's doing.
Mm-hmm.
And if we don't want a formal diagnosis in the official chart, there's a lot of good reasons for that.
Yep.
You know, RFK Jr. is one of them, but even I think before sort of the unmasking of the authoritarians here, that's not always been a plus to have in your file because it comes with a lot of stigma. But on the flip side, there are a lot of folks who need accommodations and need the formal diagnosis to get those accommodations. Autism spectrum disorder is covered under the Americans with Disability Act. And so there's a lot of legal protection that can come with that formal diagnosis. So just filling in some gaps here for folks not in the business who are like, why would you clarify formal versus informal diagnosis?
Thank you
that's
for clarifying that. Yeah, I talk with the folks that I diagnose as well. I talk through that with them, and for some of them, it makes sense to have that formal diagnosis, and for some of them, it is more of I need this information. It's helping me understand my brain, but I'm not in a position where I'm seeking accommodations or where I want this officially recorded somewhere.
Yeah. I mean, I know you're a private practice owner, as am I. Do you do formal diagnoses for most of your clients? I find I do less and less unless clients need me to.
Yes, I am the same way. And I am a self-pay private practice. So I don't have to have a diagnosis for insurance or anything like that. Sometimes I'm working with folks who, for whatever reason, won't or need a diagnosis. Or if folks want to try for out-of-network payment to get some reimbursement from their insurance, then diagnosis can be part of the picture there. But yeah, less and less official diagnosis happening for people.
Yeah. So it's a weird conversation, right, around how we as therapists, licensed professionals, talk about diagnosis, because I think the professionals, all sort of have this idea of clinical documentation means diagnosis. But then we're talking about autism, like the diagnosis there doesn't necessarily mean clinical documentation. It simply means like, hey, this is what we call those symptoms. that all fits the autism spectrum disorder, or that fits under this wide umbrella of neurodivergence. And so language sort of fails us sometimes, I think, in always clarifying that, but I try and be clear with folks that like what goes in the official file sometimes is different than what I'm talking about, just to understand your own brain.
Yes, yeah, definitely. And
So
I was just
go
gonna
ahead.
say, for me, like being very open with folks of, if you want to know the ins and outs of why I'm documenting things a certain way, we can talk about that, because some folks
Yeah.
do. And some folks are like, no, I trust that you are doing what you need to do, and we're doing what we need to do in therapy sessions.
Yeah, and documentation has very rarely been for clients' benefits. It's almost always been part of the capitalistic healthcare model in America here. And so, yeah, that's a separate topic for another
It
day.
is.
I don't I can't help myself. I document less and less now as well, especially as we move into uh, a time and place where certain diagnoses, where we have a government that is interested in eugenics, I guess is how I'll summarize it.
Yeah.
And so,
Yeah.
and so we have to be careful. And as a provider, you should be thoughtful in what you are writing down and what you aren't. Aware of that, right? Like there's a reason to not diagnose something like ASD for everyone. I'm very wary of putting that in a clinical note for kids now, in a way that I just never was before.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
a topic for another day. You mentioned sort of because of your generation. So you're that either geriatric millennial or real young Gen X, right? You're
Yeah.
sort of that
Yeah.
in
I
between.
actually think that the term, I've heard it pronounced zennial and exennial, but kind of this micro generation from 1977 to 1983. I feel like that fits me really well.
Yeah.
Which would make sense. I was born in 1980, so it would make sense. I'm right in the middle of that.
Yeah, my brother is the same age, and he really dislikes when I call him a geriatric millennial. But yeah, sort of, maybe missing some of that late 90s, early 2000s ADHD diagnosis boom, which wasn't, I don't want to say that was a bad thing, which was a weird time, I'll say, in mental health. I was not working in mental health then. I was an 8th grader or whatever it was. But like there was this big boom in diagnosis around ADHD in the late 90s, predominantly for little boys, predominantly only with symptoms that would sort of fall in hyperactivity. And so is that sort of what you're talking about, of missing that boom, or is there more to it that I, as a sort of more younger classic millennial, am missing out?
Yeah, well, big pieces for me are the fact that when I was a child, one of the main things that was looked for an autism diagnosis was an intellectual disability. If you didn't have an intellectual disability, like autism wasn't even considered. That was not and is not part of the picture for me. I did very well academically in school, so would never even be considered. Also, for me, a lot of my kind of stimming behaviors or things that I do to regulate myself are more internal, and they're things that are socially acceptable. Other people don't know. They were quiet in the classroom. Teachers didn't pick up on it. I wasn't disrupting other people. And a lot of the social challenges that I had were very internal. So from the outside, it looked like, oh, she's a quiet, well-behaved little girl.
Yeah.
Nobody knew that I was really struggling.
Yeah. And then layer on top of that, being raised in a church environment, being a quiet, meek little girl is probably a rewarded behavior.
Yes, very much so. So there's definitely parts of my life where it's hard to kind of tease apart the overlap of, was this a message that I got from culture of being a little girl in the South, a smart little girl doing well in school, or a message that I got from church of, this is what girls do, this is how you're supposed to behave, and how did that all intertwine in my own experience?
Yeah, for sure. And I do think I think there's this misinformation around like autism diagnosis as this big boom right now. And the reason I went back to ADHD in the 90s is because similar to what happened then is sort of what has happened now, is some of the diagnostic criteria was updated, and a lot of clinicians are just more trained in diagnosing it now than ever before.
Yes.
And what is going on now that didn't happen in the late 90s is the internet exists. And so, well, the internet existed then, but not ubiquitous use. And
Right.
so now people go on TikTok, now people are on Instagram, other social media saying, hey, wait a minute, that person who has autism sounds a lot like what I
Mm-hmm.
have. And so there's sort of these factors overlapping with diagnosis have increased over the last, I would say, decade. But it's really because our diagnostics are a lot better and the profession as a whole is more informed
Yes,
than it used to
definitely.
be. I'm wary of, the TikTokers diagnosing based on liking chicken nuggets, right? Like research suggests at this point, it's early days in some of this research, but about 80% of autism information on TikTok is false. And so it's just, again, like it's good to know more people are getting diagnosed who have symptoms, and also there's still a lot of bad information out there.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. So being able to tease that apart, I think
Yeah.
it's also been so helpful that adults with autism have been speaking about their experience, both
Yeah.
those who were diagnosed earlier in life, but those who have been diagnosed later in life as well, to say, like,
Mhm.
yeah, this is what's observable from the outside, but this is my experience internally. This is how I have been navigating the world and what
Yeah.
I have been dealing with.
Yeah. And this, I've noticed this twice now. You've really highlighted the difference between what gets diagnosed from an external observer's perspective and the internal experience of what that is. And I'm ADHD and autistic, right? So ADHD, which is I think a little bit it is different, but again, under that neurodivergence umbrella.
Hmm.
But it's something I talk about with clients a lot because what the diagnostic criteria looks like is not what it feels like
Hmm.
internally. And I do think professionals like you and I and other people who talk on this topic, like it is important to highlight that stuff because if a client doesn't have the right language, they might not get sent for testing. They might
Yes.
not get diagnosed because it's a lot of what that clinician is looking for is external as opposed to internal.
Yes. And one that I think about is the criteria talking about like the intense interest and like how rigid person's interest can be. Well, if
Mhm.
that interest is something that is socially acceptable, like in my circles, religion,
Yeah.
totally socially acceptable. It's great that you are quote unquote sold out for your faith. So that's not seen as a problem, even
Right.
though it is an intense special interest, or it was for me,
Yeah.
and so seeing how that can play out as well, if that criteria can be totally missed, if
Mhm.
somebody's like, oh, well, that what you're interested in is socially acceptable based on how I view your
Yeah.
place in society, your gender, whatever it may be.
Right. Right. And there's a lot of I think special interests involved in religion. You have ancient civilizations. I think a lot of people who are musical or creative are underdiagnosed, and they might be really into the worship liturgy or some of the hymnology or some of those things. Like there's a lot of
Hmm.
things that I think I just off the top of my head as you're talking about like socially approved, but specifically religiously approved
Yes.
hyperfixations are there's a bunch of them. um, yeah, even just thinking of like some of the cultier side of things that I've worked with, like some of the really restrictive groups in like I'm in the Midwest, so in the rural northern Wisconsin area, like a lot of restrictions around what you can wear, textile, clothing stuff. And I'm just like, as somebody with sensory issues, like,
Hmm.
yeah, if
Yes.
I were going to start
Yeah.
a religion, I'd have a lot of rules about what can touch your skin and what can't.
Uh-huh. I think about I'm in North Carolina, and so I think about like really the height of the purity culture movement in the 90s, and that coincided with me being in high school. And so much of the prohibitions around sexuality and how you interact with people, and what is expected and what is prohibited, and how that can intertwine with
Yeah,
neurodivergence, particularly if there's um, some differences in awareness of your body, or if you're maybe on the asexuality spectrum, like that
yeah,
makes purity culture real easy because I'm not interested in sex anyway, so I just look like I'm super pure.
yeah. Yeah. And I think similarly for folks who are gender expansive or people who are trans, or even I think queer folks, who maybe don't have a tighter, that sounds judgy, who don't have a specific label they like to use beyond queer, like, again, there's some simplicity to having all those rules to follow that isn't healthy long term, but short term sometimes can prop up or help mask some of the otherwise untreated, unmanaged symptoms of
Yeah.
neurodivergence. And so that might be a struggle, except I have all these rules I can follow. So I'll just do that because that's what I'm supposed to do.
And then I get rewarded for following the rules. So it's
Right.
like this reinforcing thing.
Yeah. 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 I see that a lot. And again, it's in a way very predatory, I think, in the sense that folks in a marginalized community are sort of drawn towards those rules. That structure helps the neurodivergent brain, and it really hinders sort of any authentic or organic growth that people can have, especially around sexuality, because that often might not really take center stage until your brain development catches up around puberty. And if you're already in the church at that point, like, you have a lot of rules and regulations to be following.
Yeah. Yeah. And if you happen to be a neurodivergent person who makes a lot of connections and you're starting to think maybe these rules don't apply or they don't fit me, you're also very aware of what are the consequences if I suddenly am not following the rules anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, a common symptom for neurodivergent folks is black and white thinking. And so sin as a concept, as a totally arbitrary social construct, is very black and white. There is righteous behavior and there's sin.
Yep.
And so if your brain is already prone to making some of those categories, this thing that you feel uncomfortable with because you're inexperienced or ill-informed about it, then just gets labeled as sin. And rather than learning and experience something, you just stay away from it because it's sinful.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think, again, common symptom for neurodivergence, sensory issues, like when we talk about interoception, that awareness of what your body is trying to signal to your brain. Libido is tied to that. People think about, in a hyper focus, you're maybe not going to stop to eat, or you're not going to stop to go to the bathroom, but that's all interoception, right? And so am I hungry? Am I thirsty? Am I tired? And a lot of these things get sort of wrapped up in a spirituality that it's really just, we have processing issues, not we're, really in it for God, or we're really crushing this 24-hour lock-in we're supposed to do.
Right. Yes.
But rather that it's something that, we're not real in tune with our body to begin with.
Yeah. And I think about kind of a flip side of that too, of if you're in a group or a church that focuses on like feeling the Holy Spirit or feeling some kind of conviction, and you're like trying to almost create like, okay, I'm experiencing something in my body. And it could be that you're hungry or that you need to use the restroom, but it gets framed as that's the conviction. That's how you know that you're doing right or wrong.
Yeah. Or, it's dopamine from music because your brain likes music and you like the worship band, right? Like, I have for a lot of the ADHD folks I work with, like, that is hard to tease out of, like, is this good, healthy, something sustainable, or is it just like a dopamine fix?
Yes.
And again, I think that's hard to tease out when questioning that might lead to your eternal downfall, right? Like, that's not safe to explore and start to understand yourself in that way.
Yeah. And in so many of these contexts, any kind of exploration or questioning of anything is frowned upon. I know one thing for me that I didn't make all the connections until after the fact, but often I would be confronted with people saying like, Michelle, that was so unkind, or like, why did you speak that way? And realizing like that I was speaking in a very clear, direct way because that is my preferred way to communicate. I've learned how to communicate in other ways and can mask it, but at times it didn't happen. But as somebody socialized female, viewed as a woman in the church, like, you're supposed to speak and be a certain way, and bold and direct and having questions. does not fit with that
Yeah.
stereotype.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, anything that's questioning, right? Like that's the church doesn't, I mean, we're talking high control religions here, but like for a lot of folks growing up in the 90s, early 2000s, evangelicalism has always been pretty fundamentalist across the nation, whether it's Southern Baptist or it's some of the smaller, cultier versions out in the West Coast. I grew up Wells, which is Wisconsin Evangelical Lutheran Synod, like super fundamentalist. And so, again, that black and white thinking and that strong prohibition against questioning anything. Exploration is a slippery slope.
Yes. And that phrase being used all the time, slippery slope. Like anything that's just slightly feels like it's off the line of whatever the group preaches, slippery slope. This is going to lead to your downfall.
Yeah. Which it isn't a concept that's backed by any form of research. There's nothing about that. You know, the classic example is sort of marijuana is a gateway drug. Like there's no research that backs up that marijuana usage leads to harder drug usage. And so, but like, I don't know, whatever propaganda came out at that time that made slippery slope so ubiquitous, like it does a lot of heavy lifting when it's not really based on anything.
Yeah. And when you're in a system that doesn't encourage questioning and the leaders continue to say whatever it is, the phrase, the teaching, you just keep believing it. It keeps being passed down because everyone is afraid to question.
Yeah. And I think for a lot of, well, it depends because, neurodivergence is such a spectrum. I'm not somebody who, what I've always interpreted as being a very chill, mellow person is really emotions just don't hit me that strongly. And so, but I know there are folks on the different spaces in the spectrum who are highly sensitive. And like, so a lot of this stuff, again, can show up the internal process of what we're experiencing when we're questioning something could cause a lot of like anguish for somebody who's highly sensitive. For me, it was always almost like understimulating. I was like, well, that's what the pastor says. I guess that's what I'm supposed to believe. I better leave it alone. For other people, you know, it's that spiritual warfare stuff, and they're really internalizing a lot of it because that's what their brain likes to do with sensory input.
Yes. Yeah. That's so important, is being aware of how lots of folks can fit under the neurodivergent umbrella, and how it affects them and how it shows up can look so different. But it's not a one size fits all type of thing.
Yeah. And I don't know if you are you on the ADHD side of things at all?
I'm not sure. Until I hit perimenopause, I would have said definitely no. Like I'd be like, no, ADHD is not part of it. But I've had multiple conversations with other friends and colleagues in the field that are like, feel like you might be ADHD. So
yeah,
I'm not sure.
We need to have a much, much wider conversation as a country, as the scientific community, on what menopause does to the brain. Because there certainly is some common experience around brain fog that can look a lot like ADHD. And even as somebody who does diagnostics, like I don't know how to tease that out.
Yeah, the hormonal shifts.
For my 40-year-old women out there, who I'm like, I'm pretty sure you're ADHD, but like, I don't know, it might be menopause. Yes, that is also a wider conversation. But again, like I think these are the things that sort of like, we're both licensed, credentialed therapists who've been in the field for a long time, and like there's not good research about this stuff.
Yeah. Well, so many things around women's health, there's not good research. You know, this is really the first generation of women that are talking about like, hey, perimenopause is a thing. This hits you before you're in menopause. Stuff starts changing. These are things that you can expect.
Yeah. And you know, you highlighted this earlier, but just to reiterate that the way diagnostics work for people who are socialized female looks different than for males. And so a lot of those things I see for a lot of late diagnosed ADHD folks, they get misdiagnosed with anxiety or borderline personality disorder earlier in life, when what is hyperactivity is taken as nerves or is taken as something else. And so
yeah, And I've had a long-term anxiety diagnosis since adolescence. And so I'm like, oh, it makes sense. If you hit a point where the structures that you built and that were able to sustain and kind of mask some of those ADHD symptoms no longer work, yeah, was that actually anxiety, or has the ADHD and that internal hyperactivity been there the whole time?
Right. Am I doing this activity because I'm anxious, or am I stimming? Like, again, like those can look really similar. And what we see with, I think, untrained professionals is they're not doing any differential diagnosis for something like that. It is merely like, oh, you're female, must be anxious.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, that sucks. That's,
to.
Yeah, that's bad. Therapists, be better. But again, I think it is important to point out that like a lot of these diagnoses are how you show up externally is where you get your diagnosis, but it can be totally unrelated to how you feel. Like, I always highlight impulsivity as a diagnostic. Like, I've never felt like an impulsive person. It's not like a drive you feel internally. It's like, I'm bored. It's almost always been boredom for me. And so again, like, that experience is not, that diagnostic criteria doesn't make any sense. It's based on, you're not hitting your social norm. You're supposed to sit still, or you're supposed to do X, Y, Z. And again, like, religious structures cover a lot of that up because there's rules and regulations. So
and when you think about sitting still, like, a lot of times folks will think ADHD, someone who can't sit still, they're up moving around. But the flip side of that is, what are you doing to make yourself sit still? You may be in a situation where, you know, I have to stay in the seat. So how much effort am I putting in to make sure I stay in the seat? How else am I stimulating myself, you know, occupying my brain, my body, to be able to stay here?
Yeah. Yeah. And I don't know, you grew up in the South, right? And so what was sort of the overlap, at least in your experience? I'm not asking you to speak for the whole region. But what was your experience sort of around, like, the difference between, like, against a concept like spiritual warfare or like demonic possession even, versus like a mental health issue as we would understand it now?
Yeah. Mental health was not really talked about at all. I was probably like into late adolescence before I even was aware of the concept of mental health. So in my tradition, I grew up in a Southern Baptist church, but it was not your typical Southern Baptist church because it was a really small rural church. So some of the things you think about with Southern Baptist applied, but some don't. So not as much talk about like demonic possession, but definitely that idea of spiritual warfare, you know, and kind of the idea that if you're struggling, it's it's rooted in something spiritually. So if you can take care of that, then you'll be fine.
Yeah. I have a very strong memory of a kid, and I went to private school, like parochial religious school, of a kid like leaving really abruptly. And I think they were, I'm reflecting 30 years later, I think they were probably having either a psychotic break. I think they're probably bipolar. But I remember like the gossip that went around the school after they left was like, somebody had found their journals and there was a bunch of like weird writings in it, and like that it was like a demon thing. And that was not part of my tradition at all. Like, we were not faith healers. It was very stoic German Lutheran, like, right? Nothing was fun or exciting. And so like that was really out of the ordinary, but that was, even though it was so out of the ordinary, that was still like sort of the given rationale of like, well, demon possession is a much better explanation than something like mental health. And that would have been, that would have even been in like the late 90s.
I think I got kind of this odd juxtaposition of religion when I was younger, because like I said, I Southern Baptist church, but not the traditional kind of bigger Southern Baptist church. I did go to public school, but then after college, I actually worked in ministry in a high control religious group. And that was where a lot of my experience was, with the high control aspect. Like, some of it was present earlier, but not to the extent that it was when I was working in ministry.
Almost more the sort of wider socialized female cultural stuff at the younger age.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm going to be stereotypical here for a second and just say there's a lot of undiagnosed neurodivergence in the adults who work in the church crowd.
Yes. Yes.
And I don't say that to be mean, right? Like those are my people, but I feel for folks who are undiagnosed. And I talk about this a lot, that like for unmanaged neurodivergence, structure is really helpful. And
Yes.
so when you're in high control religion, those rules and regulations can feel beneficial for a while because it provides some stability that you're not experiencing from your own brain.
Yeah, it does. I mean, it is that built-in structure. It's these built-in relationships and guidance on what those relationships are supposed to look like and how you're supposed to interact with each other. You know, there can be structure in your week, in your services, in handling your finances, like so much structure. And then often I find that when folks start to burn out, or suddenly it's like, I can't manage this level of masking to try to meet the regulations and the guidelines, that is when it turns into, oh, this is not supportive anymore. It's not okay if I show up as who I actually am. If I'm not staying in line, then all of a sudden this thing that was so supportive and that I really built my life around kind of wants me out. It views me as a problem.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, that might be labeled as a lack of faith. That might be labeled as an unwilling spirit. That might be labeled as not being servant minded. Like there's lots of, I think, spiritual bypassing that goes on, but also just language around the inevitable burnout that happens in a lot of these church spaces.
Yeah, yeah. I find that in so many of the clients that I work with. Like I've been working pretty specifically with religious trauma for about the past 5 years. And in the past 2-ish years, I've had so many folks that also late identified neurodivergence was part of their story. And they were maybe on staff at a church, on staff in a ministry, or like very heavily involved and had that experience of this space that was so supportive suddenly was not. And it actually was harmful.
Yeah. And I think it's not common symptom, again, I'll say, but with autism spectrum disorder specifically, like having some of those relationship dynamics scripted, having a small group that you're assigned to rather than needing to make friends, like some of that stuff, again, is beneficial short term. And when you're on the outs, like you haven't necessarily built some of the skills or some of the management techniques to be able to do that stuff on your own. That like the church, I would never describe the structure of the church as healthy. It helps you mask, which is tiring. That has a cost.
It does.
And it helps you be in that community, but it's not natural or organic or healthy growth. It's just more masking.
Yes. Yeah. And I think so many folks saw some of that, like with the pandemic shutdowns. And I've been reflecting lately, especially on how that impacted a lot of neurodivergent folks, because especially if maybe you had a special interest that was very helpful to the church, like maybe you're the person that arrives early and makes the coffee, or you're the person who does all the audio visual stuff for their service. Well, when we're not meeting in person, we suddenly don't need that anymore. You, as somebody, I speak for myself, somebody who is autistic, that relational piece does not come super easy. I enjoy knowing this is my role. When that role is gone, well, now how do I relate? And then after the fact, when folks started gathering again, there's a lot of overlap between neurodivergence and chronic illness. So a neurodivergent person may have needed to be more aware, wanted to continue masking, that kind of thing, which was frowned upon in their church. And it's like, okay, well, this group that I thought I belonged to is rejecting me in every way. Yeah.
And hasn't allowed you the space to grow those skills or management techniques elsewhere. So you're like really stuck.
Just kind of left floundering.
Yeah. That's, I've done this for about a similar time frame. We left the church. My oldest will be 7, so 7 years ago. And then I sort of formally folded it in after going back to school for a bit, not full-time school, but studying religious trauma specifically. So about 5 years where it's been a focus. And I'm just like blown away by how often I have a new example of it's all in group out group dynamics. I say
Mm-hmm.
that weekly, if not on a daily basis. But like it's so pervasive, all the little ways it shows up that like you are rewarded for fitting in the way we want you to and in a way that benefits us. And as soon as that goes away, there's no more reward.
Yeah, yeah. And in my own story, I think about the overlap of I also was single until my late 30s. And
Hmm.
so that added on top of you're in this church structure, ministry structure that is really built around being married and having a family. I'm not
Yeah.
doing that. Um, well, I got the message a lot of there must be some reason. There's unconfessed sin. Like there's a reason that you're not married.
Yeah.
But no consideration of how neurodivergence might be playing into the fact that no, I didn't get married when I was 24.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And I
So
think,
many intersecting pieces.
there are. um, right. And so many overlapping things, right? We were not even
Hmm.
raised, we're both raised Christian, but like we're not in the same denominations, not the same regional stuff. And there's so much overlap in your story into my clients, but also like the experiences of other people in the church that I grew up in. It's it's shocking, even though I do this work professionally.
Yeah, yeah. I feel like on a
uh,
regular basis, I'm like becoming aware of like, oh, that's another way that it intersects, another way that it has impacted folks.
yeah, yeah. And again, I think with neurodivergent, undiagnosed neurodivergence, you already feel like you don't fit in.
Hmm.
Like there's a strong sense of I had breakfast with someone this morning. We were talking about like I described it as being like an alien. Like I've always sort of felt like this alien anthropologist who studies humans so that I can like fit in.
Yes.
Um, but when you're a kid, like that's just weird, like even if you're aware of something like that, you don't talk to people about it. You don't say that out loud because there's that awareness that that's odd.
Hmm.
Um, and so you sort of have this baked in, like, I can't talk about some of this stuff. And
Yeah.
again, I think the label of sin and that like threat of being excommunicated or losing your like privileged status, whatever that might mean, um, makes it even harder to like delve into this stuff and look at what it might mean for you.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, I remember I was probably 4 or 5 on the playground and like watching other kids play and be like, it feels like it's so easy for them. Like they
Mhm.
got some kind of, I don't know if I thought this at 4 or 5, but some kind of manual, some kind of, they know how to do this. Like, I don't know how to do this.
Yeah. Yeah. And yeah, like the thing that kept me in the church the longest in my story is like hell trauma. And so that idea of like doing it wrong has this really big bad threat at the end of it, like
Hmm.
really hampered me asking questions or talking about things um, for a long time. I mean,
Yeah.
I remember
And
10 as being like my first time where I was like, I don't think I want to go to heaven. And like it was a couple of years before I like brought up my next set of questions.
yes. Yeah. Oh, yeah. And I lost my train of thought. It was
Well, and
gone. No.
yeah, it's and again, I think that experience for whether it's autism spectrum disorder, whether it's ADHD, whether it's sensory processing disorder, even something like dyslexia, like if you're doing
Hmm.
memory work and that's part of your like grade and you're undiagnosed dyslexic, like yeah, that sucks. And then if there's
Yes.
spiritual bypassing where that's going to get labeled you're lazy or you're sinful or you know it's a spiritual issue, like not only are you not getting help and accommodations and resources, but now you are carrying this like shameful label around with you too.
Yes. Yeah. That brought me back to what I was thinking of that idea of the spiritual bypassing and the being aware enough to know I can't mention that this is a problem because I'm going to be told like you need to trust God more or you
Yeah.
need to pray more about it, like it wouldn't be a problem, instead of, oh, maybe you actually have a brain difference that makes it difficult to read or memorize things.
Yeah.
Maybe you actually have something going on in the way that your brain functions and processes information that is
Yeah.
creating this. It's not a matter of you need to pray more.
Right. Yeah. And again, that I don't want to soapbox too hard here, but like that's all in the service of the church's core messaging of in-group, out-group dynamics. If we allow for neurodivergence, then we have to allow that there's diversity and variability in God's creation. And if we do that, then what do we do about gay people? And if we do that, what,
Yes.
it's this, it's not a slippery slope for folks to understand their own experience, but when you're claiming to have firsthand knowledge of what God wants, there's a lot of slippery slopes to move away from like the infallible word of God.
Yes. And then if you start to acknowledge, if you're in a belief system that says God is the creator and created all people, and then you start to acknowledge that there is diversity and difference in people, okay, well, did God make a mistake? Or people are like, what? Somewhere there's a breakdown between these two things.
Yeah. It's all in the service of like maintaining that control that comes with the organizing principle of organized religion, in-group, out-group dynamics of like, this is the in-group that we want in this church.
And keeping everybody aligned with that in-group dynamic, whatever the specifics are for that group.
And I, in the Midwest here, we have a lot of churches that are tied to schools. And so, I went to parochial school my whole life. And this is where we went to church too. And so if the church acknowledged something like neurodivergence, but like the school would also have to do that. And private schools are not required by law to have special education services, are not required by law to have some of those accommodations that neurodivergent kids or kids with different needs might need. So putting on my tinfoil hat for a sec, I would say there's also a financial component to maintaining some of these things for those schools to not need to have special ed staff or to not have testing done. And like, that's dark, that there are kids who are in those schools now who need accommodations and services and won't get them because the church specifically does not want that messaging to get out.
We're not going to acknowledge that you exist.
Right. Yeah. Just a reminder why we do the work we do, I guess.
Yeah. And I think it's so hard for folks who have gotten all of those messages that just the way that their brain is built is sinful. Like we talked about that, but when you start reflecting back on your experience, I'm thinking about my own experience and folks that I've talked with of like specific things that were labeled sinful. Like I really thrive when I have a routine. I want to know what's happening. Like if we're having a meeting, what's the agenda? And when the agenda goes off, like I have an internal nervous system reaction to it. I can't control it. But that was so often labeled as sin, I would get reprimanded for it, kind of questioning, how can you be a ministry leader if you can't trust God and you just need to be able to vary things, and, no acknowledgement of like, okay, but I'm having this nervous system reaction that I can't control.
Yeah. And spiritual bypassing, none of those things address the nervous system.
Right. Yeah. We just completely bypass any emotional processing, any psychological growth. We're not doing any of that. We're just going to put some spiritual words on it.
And so there's no soothing. There's also no management that comes from that. It is, it's the cycle of you're going to have that reaction again. It's going to be labeled sinful. You're going to get no help and you're going to feel bad, which makes you feel like you need a savior, which is what the church provides.
Yes. Yeah. And then going back to that masking, it also teaches you, I'm having this reaction, but I've got to mask this reaction because we can't acknowledge it. We can't bring it forward. There's not going to be support. So not only am I having the reaction, now I'm also investing a whole lot of energy in managing how that reaction is coming out so that I don't get in trouble.
Right. Ugh. Yeah. There's so many layers to it, and it's insidious in the sense that even when people leave the church, like this stuff sticks with them. This is not like a light switch you turn off of, I don't believe that anymore, and now all this yucky, gross stuff also goes away. Like, no, that stuff stays in, and it's work and effort to learn how to regulate your system and what needs aren't being met and how you go about meeting those needs. Like, there's a whole process to sort of unlearning, not just unlearning the unhealthy stuff, but also like figuring out, which usually happens at a younger age for folks, what this support thing might look like.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it adds another layer on top of folks that have experienced religious trauma. There's like that cognitive deconstructing. I don't believe this, or I believe this part, but not this part. There's also the figuring out all of the somatic and body stuff. And then if neurodivergence is also a part of it, figuring out like, okay, well, what part of this is nervous system reaction to the trauma? What part of this is how my brain and body and nervous system are built? How do I tease all of this apart?
Yeah. Yeah. Yep. Yeah. And often for folks who leave the church and figure this out all at sort of the same time without support, because you lose that community.
Yeah. So you're going through one of the hardest things in your life, and all of the support that you thought you had in place is gone.
Yeah. Yeah. And I see, you know, on a pretty regular basis, that is the thing that hits people the hardest. You know, we can do the neurodivergence thing. We can figure out diagnosis and support. In a lot of ways, that's like a pretty fun's maybe the wrong word, but like almost a joyous experience to connect with yourself in that way. But the loss of community and the reality that like, it's not that we were really close or really friends or that these people love me. It's just in-group dynamics. And that hits really hard.
Yeah. Yeah. I find that as well. And I find for most people, they realized they were going to lose part of that, but there were some relationships that they thought, this is going to withstand. This person actually cares about me. And when those are lost, like those are the ones that hit really hard of like, I thought that we were actually friends, like maybe even almost like family. And now you want nothing to do with me. Yeah.
And if you were undiagnosed, you know, neurodivergent kid, you might struggle with socializing. And so that loss hits doubly hard because you might have some internal dialogue around being unlikable or being somebody who doesn't do friends particularly well like that. It can be a really devastating loss.
Yeah. Yeah. I think on the flip side, I've seen some really beautiful examples of folks finding other neurodivergent community or finding queer community where it's like, oh, this is what it's actually like to be able to connect with people and be who I am and not have to follow a certain script.
I hear that pretty regularly too in my office, especially the queer community, the idea of like, oh, this is what unconditional love actually feels like. And it's so different than what the church preaches.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And that feeling of your whole self being allowed to show up, like the good, the bad, and the ugly. Because for so many people, part of their church experience is, I must appear this way, whatever this way is, kind of going back to that in-group, out-group. In our group, this is the way that you show up. So when you connect with a community where it's like, oh, I can show up how I am. And if I'm exploring my queer identity, I'm exploring my neurodivergent identity, that's welcome here as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And when you find someone whose neurotype plays well with yours, like it's just a very rewarding experience. I always sort of tell people neurodivergent brains find each other, which I truly believe that. I don't use it as a cliche, but you need it. Like your brain needs that space to just sort of be its unique little self. And when someone else can see that and enjoy it, not just tolerate it, but enjoy it, like it's really lovely.
Yes, it is. I think that's so true. I mean, I think that's one of the reasons I didn't get married earlier in life, even though I was in this group where it was very much encouraged, because my neurodivergent brain needed to find its neurodivergent match, you know, and being able to have those conversations of, my brain is just doing this thing. Like, this is not about you. My brain is doing this thing.
Right. Yeah. And again, I think I experience this and I hear it regularly of just like the difference of what like love feels like when it's not based on an in-group, out-group dynamic. Like some of the queer spaces I've been in, some of the pagan spaces I've been in, which both include a high degree of neurodivergence, have just been like really unmasked, non-judgmental, loving spaces. And like, it does wonders for your nervous system to be able to do that.
Yeah. Yes. And I feel like it can feel so relieving and almost kind of odd at first as well, of like, what is it like to show up in this space? Okay, I just
Yeah.
said that thing and nobody like batted an eye. If we just moved on and or nobody's like trying to read into some context that I didn't actually have there. Like, I said what I meant to say. I meant
Yeah.
exactly what my words were.
Yeah. Yeah. And like that freedom that comes, I think it's scary sometimes to not have that social script if you need it. But then when you like realize there's no consequence for not having it, it's very freeing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And having that freedom when you're interacting with other neurodivergent folks, of those moments when your mind just does like, I had a thing, the thing is gone, of just being able to name like, this is what just happened. That's why
Yeah.
I'm not responding to you right now, because the thing I was gonna say is gone.
Yeah. Yeah. What's your experience sort of been as a therapist being late diagnosed? Has it changed who you work with? Has it changed how you work? What's that sort of looked like for you?
I think it has in some ways. I definitely have intentionally started, advertising that I work with neurodivergent folks, particularly late identified women.
Yeah.
I had some that were naturally coming into my practice anyway,
Yeah.
but being more intentional about highlighting that. And I feel like there was a lot of ways that I was navigating and modeling and setting up my practice that are neuroaffirming anyway, just because I was supporting my own system, and recognizing that people are different and have different needs, and there's no one size fits
Yeah.
all. But being even more intentional about that, and being aware of things that may not be things that my brain and nervous system needs, but could be helpful and accommodating and supportive to someone else's brain and nervous system, and are things that I'm able to give without it costing my nervous system anything.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I think similarly, I kept a lot of, I didn't have any fidget toys in my office for a long time because I knew I would play with them. And like I had that messaging that would be unprofessional. And I've really like sort of gone the other direction. There's a lot of tactile stuff. There's a lot of various fidget stuff in my office now because I work with so many neurodivergent folks. And again, similar to you, I drew them in. Again, neurodivergent brains find each other before I advertise. I was diagnosed in my 20s with ADHD, but the autism diagnosis was more recent. And yeah, like just sort of leaning in and saying like, I don't need to like be professional. If I need to like have something fidgety in my hand, that's fine.
Yeah. Yes, I can still show up as the professional in the space and not have to fit those stereotypes of what quote unquote professional is.
Professional
you
is.
know.
Yeah.
And so my work is all virtual, but I'll talk with clients as they're coming in of like, you are welcome to have things nearby that help you bring comfort. If that's fidget items, if that's having your pet nearby, if you want to make sure that you have a warm or cold beverage or whatever helps. If you need to take breaks, if you need to move around, like we can make space for all of that. To kind of accommodate what is actually most helpful.
Yeah, my ADHD is much worse doing virtual sessions. Like I have deconstructed a hair tie here in our conversation off screen and have tied it into knots and untied it. And I don't do that stuff in person. I'm more attuned, I would say, to what's going on in the room in person. I think that's more ADHD than anything, just that level of stimuli. But yeah, I mean, it does. I think when we as professionals not just can own and name our experience, but also have the language to explain it to our clients, it makes a world of difference for them too. Not just that we're not just saying it to be nice therapists, we're modeling it and we're like building it into all levels of our practice. And that in a lot of ways lets people feel more comfortable with it.
Yeah. And I think what you shared about your experience with virtual, like that is the perfect example of how something that is accommodating for one person is not accommodating for another. I did not think I would like virtual sessions. I was forced into it like many people during COVID, and then have found like I'm so much more able to be present with folks because of all the messaging that I got around what's your body doing and how are you sitting and is this distracting and what do you look like and all of that is not present virtually. Like very often am fidgeting the heck out of pens during sessions, and nobody knows. I'm not worried about, is this bothering you? Are you thinking about this? But I will share that with clients of like, I'm fidgeting too. Like, this just happens to be my fidget.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Michelle, this has been lovely. I really enjoy, I'm always fascinated by how people get in the profession. So I do enjoy the getting to know you episodes, but I love having people on who've sort of been introduced to the audience who can come on and share some lived experience and some expertise. I want to do a plug for your work in that I know you offer a lot of CEUs and training opportunities for therapists. So if clients want to find out your work, but strong recommend for other therapists to look at your work because you do those CEU trainings.
Yes.
Where do people go? How do they find you? How can they connect with your work?
Yeah, so information about both my client-facing work and my continuing education is on my website. So it's just michellefmoseley.com. And there are tabs for the various client work that I do. There's a continuing education tab. And I do have a couple in the next few months coming up around religious trauma. I have one that's more of introductory, maybe for therapists who are like, I'm not really sure what that is. I just kind of want to know a little information. And one that is a much more foundational, dive in a little deeper for those who might want more information there. So all that info is on my website.
Yeah. And I love to do the plug because therapists are always looking for CEUs. So
yes,
it's nice. And I trust somebody who does this work and has done their own work around doing this to do a training like that than, what you're fingers crossed going to find at one of the larger nation-based conferences and those types of things. It is a very nuanced topic.
I try really hard to make sure that there's value in the CEs that I offer, because I think we've all had that experience of taking part in the CE and being like, well, just check the box. I don't feel like I learned anything, but
yeah, my autistic brain is sitting in the audience being like, I could have done this better than they did it.
That happens sometimes as well.
So no, and that's great, and a great resource. And for folks, I should have checked. I didn't because I had you on before. One of the Carolinas. I don't remember which one.
North Carolina.
North Carolina.
Yes, I am in North Carolina.
And so for folks anywhere in the state, because you're virtual, which is great too, and a good deal of accessibility. It's part of, I think, doing religious trauma is, for me too, I think I'm the only person who's trained in religious trauma. There are a few folks who have lived experience around it in the state, but there's maybe 3 of us in the state of Wisconsin who advertise religious trauma. And so virtual is such a good offering for folks because sometimes they live a few hours away and they very much need a therapist who has that specialty.
Yeah. And I have found that for some folks, they want to work with somebody that's not in the same part of the state as them, especially if they were involved in maybe a big name church or a big name ministry. And they're like, I just want to be sure that you don't interact with these people. I want it separate.
Yeah. That your pastor wasn't my pastor at some point. Right.
Exactly.
Yeah, I get that a lot too. And sometimes I get the folks who, went to high school with one of my siblings or whatever, and very much appreciate the shared language. And I get that too. But so yes, Michelle F. Moseley, we'll have your link to your website in the show notes. You're on socials?
I am.
Do you have socials?
I am on Instagram. It's at therapy_with_Michelle. Same on Threads. And for anybody who is still on Facebook, Michelle F. Moseley Counseling, I am there as well, but more active on Instagram and Threads.
There's the Zillennial coming out, the Facebook plug.
Exactly. Well, it was already set up, and so it's like, I'll keep putting stuff there for whoever might come across it, but.
For sure. We'll have those links in the show notes for folks so they can find it easily. Michelle, this has been great. Thanks for agreeing to come back on the podcast and chat with us today.
Thanks so much. I enjoyed the conversation.
And to all our wonderful listeners, thanks for tuning in again this week. We'll be back next week with a new episode. Take care, everyone.